Hello and welcome into this episode of the Educational Duct Tape podcast. This is episode number, I don't know, it's somewhere around 90 or something like that. I've kind of lost count and I'm not staying very well organized. But today, my guest is going to be Dr. Catlin Tucker. We'll be talking about her new book, UDL and Blended Learning, Thriving in Flexible Learning Landscapes, which she co-wrote with the awesome Katie Novak. We'll talk about how blended learning plays a role in UDL, how educational technology and the stuff we talk about on this show fits in there, how we could personalize our students' pathways, how we could utilize choice boards, and how we could leverage educational technology to give students choice in how they express themselves, communicate, and share learning. Let's get started.
I'm Amber Harper from the Burned In Teacher Podcast and a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com. Welcome to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast with Jake Miller.
Hello, Duct Tapers. Welcome in. It's so great to have you here. Welcome to the kind of unofficial start to season 4 of the podcast. I'm not really sure if this counts as season 4. I'm not really sure what I'm doing right now, guys. I'm just trying to survive back to school time, and I feel like I don't know if I'd lose my head if it wasn't attached. I don't know. There's just so much stuff going on, you guys. But yeah, we had the season finale pretty recently, so I guess if the finale of season 3 has happened, then this must be season 4. Otherwise, we're somewhere in between season 3 and season 4. But the reason I'm not sure if this really truly counts as season 4 is this episode's going to be a little bit different. I'm not yet back into my normal school year form where I'm doing the soapbox moment and playing a game with the guest and doing some audience stuff towards the end of the show. This is really just kind of, it's almost a special episode, but it's a very special episode because of my guest, Dr. Catlin Tucker. Catlin is amazing, and I'll give her full bio when I introduce her. But to be honest, I didn't have time this summer to start preparing for the regular season episodes that are about to start up, but I had the opportunity to interview Catlin and a few other people who you'll be hearing on the show here pretty soon. And even though I wasn't ready to have my regular episodes, I just couldn't pass up on the opportunity to have these awesome people on the show. So this is, it really should be the beginning of season 4. I just don't have all of the pieces of the podcast ready. This is a very special episode for multiple reasons. Number 1, because it's a little bit different. And number 2, because Catlin is just amazing. She's been on the show before, but when somebody like Catlin has an awesome book like she has come out, I just can't miss up on the opportunity to share her insights on the show. Before we get to that discussion with Catlin, I want to point out why it is that I'm unable to get back into my regular season form, which I'll get there soon, but why I haven't been preparing soapbox moments and things like that for episodes, because I have been so incredibly busy working on the new book I'm putting out, Educational Duct Tape and EdTech Integration Mindset. The day that this podcast is released and the day that I'm recording, the book is not out yet, but it should happen within days of the release of this podcast episode. By the time you're listening, it might already be out. And it's ironic talking about this while in an episode with Catlin and having an episode with Catlin right before the book actually drops, because I can remember talking to Catlin when she was first on the show, and I can't remember if it was either on the air, like it was part of the recording, or just a discussion that she and I had off air, but she was talking about how writing a book is like having a child, which I'm allowed to say that because she is a mom and she said that. So if she says it, it must be true. I must be allowed to say it. But the metaphor sticks because you spend so much time preparing for this thing to come out, and by the time it finally happens, you just want it out. You just want that book out there. You just want that baby out there. But then when it happens, you are so incredibly proud of your new baby or your new book, and you're absolutely in love with it. But then more work starts because you've got to share more about it, and you're inspired to do more things, just like that baby is going to need some caretaking. So maybe not quite as difficult as having a child, but it is a lot of work, and it feels like it has been a long time, much longer than 9 months. It has been longer than 9 months, I'll tell you that much. And before I get to the talk with Catlin, I do want to share a little sneak peek into the book. I'll give you a few during this episode. I've given a few in the last 2 episodes of the podcast, so if you didn't listen to the season finale part 1 and part 2, there are sneak peeks built into there. I'm going to give a couple little sneak peeks here as well. First off, I talked about chapter 1 in that season finale part 1 episode, and I talked about chapter 2 in the season finale part 2 episode, so why not talk about chapter 3 here in today's episode? So chapter 3 is titled Bounce Houses, Rolling Pins, and Duct Tape. And many of you probably already know what story I'm telling if I'm talking about bounce houses and rolling pins and duct tape. But this is the chapter where I fully give the anecdote, the story, the metaphor that is educational duct tape, where I fully explain what that EdTech integration mindset is. And this is one of the things I'm most proud of with this book is I really believe when somebody reads this chapter, they are going to laugh, and at the very least, they're going to smile as they read the story. And they're going to then, with that smile on their face, they're going to then get a mindset that I think is going to help them in their classroom. And that makes me feel really proud. They're going to enjoy the reading, but actually become better equipped as educators because of the reading. And that's my goal, and I certainly hope that happens. The other half of this chapter, or the other half of the anecdote in this chapter, along with the bounce houses and rolling pins and duct tape story, is my story, The 3 Types of People at an EdTech Conference, where I go over what I believe to be the 3 types of people that you might meet at an educational technology conference, and how 2 of them have mindsets that are limiting them from integrating educational technology in their classroom to its fullest potential. And the 3rd of them has a mindset that is really helping them. And that mindset truly is the educational duct tape mindset. And so in chapter 3, we share where the educational duct tape idea came from, and also how I tied it together with the 3 types of people I was observing at educational technology conferences. And that brought about educational duct tape. And then in the second half of the chapter, as I've told you about before, the second half of every chapter is always an educational duct tape question. So it's always me asking a question that an educator might have, and then providing them with the tools to then answer that question. And the educator, the reader, you have the responsibility of going, okay, is this a question I have? Is this a problem that I have? And then if so, which one of these tools that Jake provides me with is the best option for me? And then once I identify it, going to the online resource hub that goes along with the book to learn how to use that tool so you can integrate it in your classroom. And ironically, chapter 3 is the book where you're going to develop that mindset that helps you make those decisions, because there are 11 different chapters where I answer one of those educational duct tape questions, and you can't address all of those in your classroom. There's no way you could do 11 new things in your classroom. Even if you could, it probably wouldn't be effective. So you're going to have to choose. And in this chapter, chapter 3, is where I build that mindset that will help you do that help you make that decision of which ones to prioritize and which ones to not prioritize. Speaking of prioritizing, I'd like to prioritize this wonderful episode I have for you today. Here is my discussion with Catlin Tucker. I'll come back about halfway through and share another sneak peek of the book, but here is my talk with Catlin.
Today's guest.
All right, today I'm really excited to have back with me again on the Educational Duct Tape podcast, Dr. Catlin Tucker. Catlin is a best-selling author, international trainer, and keynote speaker. She was named Teacher of the Year in 2010 in Sonoma County, where she taught for 16 years. She earned her doctorate in learning technologies from Pepperdine University and is currently working as a blended learning coach, education consultant, and professor in the Masters of Arts in Teaching program at Pepperdine. She has written a series of best-selling books on blended learning, including the new UDL and Blended Learning, Thriving in Flexible Learning Landscapes. But where you all know Catlin from is her biggest crowning accomplishment, which was having been on the Educational Duct Tape podcast, right, Catlin?
Exactly.
Yeah, you were on. It's been at least a year, maybe 2, and we talked about spiders, and we talked about you being a barista in Ireland, I think. Is that right?
That is correct.
In Cork. Well, it was in Cork, Ireland.
It was in Cork. Yeah.
Nice. I promise I did not brush up on that or re-listen to the episode. That's ingrained in my memory. It's funny. That's how things go with teaching too. The weirder and the wackier and the more off the cuff kind of off the wall things that you share. Those are the memorable ones, right?
I'm so glad I could be memorable then.
Right. But I don't remember the third thing. Oh, skydiving.
No,
skydiving was your lie, I think.
Oh, that was my lie. I was like, I've never done that. Owned Black Widow spiders, of course.
Right, that was the other one. Owned Black Widow spiders, was a barista in Ireland, and went skydiving. That was a tricky one. That was really hard to answer.
Yeah, you got it wrong.
Yeah, I did. I almost always do. Everybody that listens knows I almost always get them wrong. Well, so the reason Catlin is here is twofold. One is I wanted to publicly thank you for the wonderful endorsement that you shared for my book, Educational Duct Tape. So thank you so much for doing that for me, Catlin.
Oh, absolutely. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I appreciate you sharing the manuscript with me ahead of everybody else.
Yes, you got a sneak peek in there, right? And the other reason I want to talk with you is because you have another book out. We have to say another when we talk about you, Catlin, because you and Katie Novak released the book UDL and Blended Learning, Thriving in Flexible Learning Landscapes. And there's two reasons that I was like, Catlin and I need to have another conversation and talk about this. One is, and we were talking about this before we pressed record, I just think that talking UDL is so timely. I think we're coming around the corner where as soon as we come out of focusing on managing education in a pandemic situation, as soon as we get past all of that and we're finally done with all of that, I really think that UDL is where the focus should be. And I think it's where it will be as well. So
yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I do too. So I really think it's a timely thing for us to talk about. But also as I read that book, I felt a lot of parallels with the things that I tried to share in Educational Duct Tape. I really felt like a reader, an educator is going to pick up UDL and Blended Learning. And by page 20, they're going to go like, all right, this is what I need to do. Like if they hadn't already decided, as soon as they start reading what you and Katie have shared in there, they're going to know that this is something that they need to take steps towards doing is making their learning environment more universally designed for their students. And I thought about these educators and I thought they're going to be sold on this. You guys give them the blueprint for what this should look like. And I feel the parallel is that I'm trying to help them identify these goals. Once they have these goals, find the tech tools that help them with that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I mean, blended learning has obviously been something I've been passionate about for almost 12 years now. And even in navigating the really dramatic changes that have taken place over the last 16 months, I've been so excited about how blended learning can help teachers to navigate these different spaces. And the argument that Katie and I made coming together with UDL and Blended Learning was teachers need a mindset, a skill set, and really a tool set that allows them to be nimble enough to navigate these different teaching and learning landscapes with a lot of confidence and self-efficacy. And so we do lay out this path talking about this beautiful overlap and how to universally design blended learning to meet the needs of all students so all students can be successful. But that tool set piece is an area where a lot of teachers don't have confidence. They're not exactly sure if I'm trying to get this done, what are some of the tools that can help me to do that? And I know that's really overwhelming for teachers and sometimes get so focused on the tools. I just want to remind them, like, it's not about the tools. It's really what the tools allow us to do, which is what I appreciate about your book so much.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. And that's the goal, is helping them get that mindset right, that they don't have to, know all the tools or use all the tools. But then once they know what tools or what goals they have, helping them select those tools to take the next steps with. And what you were saying there resonated with me about the educators and the how overwhelmed they feel when using the technologies to do this universal design for learning. Because I can remember my early days as an educator starting to realize that I had a variety of ability levels and a variety of learning styles and a variety of just student personalities and all kinds of things in my classroom. And knowing that the way I was teaching was right for maybe 80% of my students, right? Maybe 70%, I don't know. But that I wasn't.
I was going to say, you're doing pretty well.
Right. You're right. But I wasn't doing well enough for everybody, but almost giving myself a free pass at that time. That's because it kind of felt like there's nothing I could do about it. Right.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely.
And I think a lot of educators feel that way because they know we're compassionate people, we're caring people, we're educators for a reason, right? We want to support students and help them do their best. But when it comes down to it, if we have, these standards we have to get through, we have these tests we have to prepare for, and we have this schedule that is we have to stick to, and it's really difficult to keep up, and we only have so much time to learn new things for our classroom. It's like, well, I'm just going to do the best I can for the majority of my students, and some students lose out, right? And I think that now with the lens that I have now, I know that educational technology can support us in doing that. But I also know that we can't just do the things to support those other 20 or 30% of the students or whatever it was in my made up ratio there, because this stuff benefits everybody, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think what's interesting, because I think back to my early years too, and the idea of personalizing pathways, of really ensuring every student had what they need to be successful, when really I had a book, I had paper and pens and a single lesson for everybody. It just would have felt so unrealistic and so daunting. And now leaning on different blended learning models, these like technology enhanced instructional models, and realizing the space and time they create, it allows for those of us who really believe in universal design and removing barriers and acknowledging that learner variability is the norm. It's not the it's not the exception, right? So we have to start thinking about, how do we lean on technology, lean on blended learning models to remove those barriers and create really flexible pathways? And the technology plays such an important part in that equation. And I tell teachers all the time, you don't need like a ton of tools to be effective in a universally designed blended learning environment. You just need some really solid tools to begin with, and then you can kind of build your toolbox over time. But don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to master a ton of tools. That's not really what's necessary for this to be succceable.
Right. It kind of reminds me of when I talk about choice boards, which is a totally different tangent here. But when I talk about choice boards with educators, there's been research done that from, Alfie Cohn has published some research, and John Hattie has published some research, and I'm blanking on the other educator who from Stanford, I believe it is, who has published some research that I cite. I'm blanking on her name, but Linda Darling Hammond. And all of the research shows that any level of choice that we give students improves student motivation, right? So it doesn't have to be a 9-section choice board, or it doesn't have to be Genius Hour. If you give them 2 choices, you're improving learning. And I think the same thing is true with UDL. And that's kind of what you're saying there. Like, if you could just add in one new piece with technology to improve that, if you just take one step, then you're improving the situation for all students. You might not be to perfection, right? But you're taking a step that helps you get there. Do you?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the blogs that I wrote in the last 6 months that really resonated with educators for the exact point you're making was this blog titled would you rather mentality to your design. So the idea was, if you're overwhelmed by, say, a choice board, then maybe just commit to lesson designing where each day in each lesson or learning experience, students get to make one would you rather choice. Would you rather work on your own or with a partner? Yeah. Would you rather go to the side of the room and participate in a live discussion, or hop on to our learning management system and engage in an asynchronous discussion? Just all of those little moments where we can say, hey, you get to make a meaningful choice here. Like you said, absolutely impacts motivation and engagement over time.
Right. Yeah. And any step that you take like that, I love that would you rather idea, because you're just giving a choice between 2 things, but that makes the choices better meet the needs of the student you're working with, and that also empowers them at the same time too. Okay, listen, I'm so sorry to interrupt this episode right now because it's such a great conversation with Catlin, and she is so brilliant, but I am enjoying listening. It's ironic. I recorded this about a month ago with Catlin. It's extra enjoyable to listen to, not only because it was awesome, because I was sitting in a room in a condo in Siesta Key, Florida, while my wife and kids and in-laws and sister were out to dinner. I stayed back and recorded this interview with Catlin, which is just, I could picture myself in this upstairs condo room looking out over this bay, and it was so beautiful while I was having this conversation with Catlin. So this makes this extra enjoyable because I'm feeling like I'm there while I'm listening to it. But one other thing that I'm excited about, not just the view that I had from that condo back in Siesta Key, one other thing that I'm excited about, as you already know and can already tell, is my book, book, Educational Duct Tape, which is coming out soon. Maybe by the time you're listening to this, it's already out. But I wanted to give you a couple sneak peeks before we dive back into this talk with Catlin. And I want to tell you about the Educational Duct Tape question that I answer in Chapter 8 of the book. So back in the season finale, Part 1, I tell you about the Educational Duct Tape questions that I answered in Chapter 2, Chapter 3, and Chapter 4 of the book. And then in the season finale, Part 2, I tell you about the questions I answer in 5, 6, and 7 of the book. And now I'm going to tell you about Chapter 8. And it's the only one I'm going to tell you because Chapter 8 really was multiple different questions in one. So the real question that I talk about there, and I tell a story that I've never told on the podcast, but myself as a basketball player and how I compare to Muggsy Bogues, the basketball player. It's an anecdote that I'm really proud of and had a lot of fun writing. I don't think I've ever shared on the podcast. So those of you that have been podcast listeners for a long time, you might message me and say, no, Jake, you've told us the story before. Or you might say, I've never heard that and I want to hear that. Well, it is in Chapter 9 of the book. And it leads up to this question: how can I measure my students' understanding, not just their knowledge of the right or wrong answer? So I do a lot of different questions in the book that are related to some pretty basic formative assessment where you can gather really quick data. And I think this is an important part of a teacher's repertoire and toolbox. But in this chapter, I wanted to really say, like, how can I see if my kids truly get it? And so I wanted some really rich ways of the students showing their learning. So I dove into multiple different ways. The first was students creating video, and I discuss 8 different video tools that I recommend. The goal is that if you feel like this is something you need to add to your teaching toolbox and you think video is a good tool for you to use, then you look and decide which one of these 8 is best for my classroom and my students. And then I say these are 6 different tools you could use for audio. And again, first you need to decide, do I need to add some rich assessment strategies? And then second, is audio something I want to add? And then third, which of these audio tools will I use? Now, actually, I cover 12 different audio tools. The first 6 are if they really want to record almost like a podcast where they're really truly editing audio and things like that. I talk about the tool I use for my podcast and that other people use for their podcast. That's the first 6 I name. And then I name 6 others that are really just if you just want your kids to record audio, here are the 6 that you could choose between. And I really feel pretty proud of the way that I've taken just a few sentences or just a few bullets and given you just enough information to make the decision of which one works best for you, hopefully without overwhelming you. And then this chapter continues with 4 different tools for animation. And again, you don't need to add in a video tool and an audio tool and an animation tool, because like Catlin and I are talking about in the episode, just any amount of that you add in, any amount of choice, any amount of new ways for students to express themselves is going to benefit your students. So you could pick one, add a video tool, add an audio tool, add an animation tool, or the next thing I mention are some visual tools. So I named 2 different tools that are my favorite tools for students creating visuals. And then also the icing on top of this chapter cake is 6 different tools that I call Swiss Army knife tools. And those are tools where you could create video or audio or animations or visuals with them. So maybe you go like, okay, these are all great, but this tool does kind of everything for me. It's a Swiss Army knife, so I'm going to use this. But again, the goal of these chapters is for you to decide, do I even need to address this? If so, is it a priority now? And if it is, what kind of things do I need to get out of this tool that I might start using? And then which of these tools meets those requirements that I have for it? And then again, once you've decided that, the online resource hub that goes along with the book helps you identify different steps that you could take to learn how to use those. Okay, let's dive back into our episode with Catlin. I had so much fun talking to Catlin. I'm going to go back in my mind to Siesta Key, Florida, and pretend that I'm sitting in that room talking to Catlin over Zencastr. And then as soon as we got done, I was going to go out and sit poolside. Here we go. I was listening recently to an episode of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast, Jennifer Gonzalez's podcast, that had on your co-author, Katie Novak, along with a co-author of hers from a previous book, Mirko, and I don't know Mirko's last name. He's just Mirko Milk. He's Mirko Milk.
Equity by Design, right?
Yeah. But anyhow, they were talking and they did this amazing metaphor for UDL, which was a staff breakfast provided by the PTA, and how frustrating it would be if they just bought like sausage, egg, and cheese sandwiches, because that would be great for some of us, right? But it wouldn't hit everybody. But then the point that I think really drove it home, I felt like it was a primer on UDL. The point that I thought really brought it home was it's not just about having a plant-based option for some staff members and having a gluten-free option for some staff members and having maybe a sweet option for some staff members. It's about the fact that all of the staff members would like to have those same choices. Even though I'd be happy with one of those options, I might be in the mood for the other one too, right? I thought that metaphor was really powerful and how UDLs for all of the students, not just that handful that weren't getting things the way you were doing things. You know?
Katie will say it. What's good for some is good for all. Definitely.
Right. Yeah. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Right? I feel like an old lady now saying that. What's good for the goose is good for the gander.
That's like something my grandma would say.
Right. Totally. As you were saying before about that would you rather activity, it reminded me of my favorite section to write of my book, which was the section where I went through and identified the different ways that a student could show their understanding with something. So I, as a teacher, sometimes do, multiple choice or extended response tests because that's the most efficient for me, right? But it doesn't necessarily, I shouldn't even say necessarily, it doesn't bring the best results from the students, right? So I was really excited to go through in that book because it was a learning opportunity for me to say, these are the video-based tools you could use. These are the audio-based tools your students could use. These are the visual-based tools your students could use. These are the altogether-based tools that your students could use, where they could do video or audio or animation or whatever I'd left out there. But giving the students those different modes of doing that, giving them that would you rather choice, and giving them their best shot at showing their comprehension and their learning and their growth.
Exactly. Yeah, I think one of the things that I included in our book was just kind of choose how you want to express, communicate, share your learning. And it was very much those options, right? Do you want to record a video? Would you like to just capture audio? Would you like to do a piece of writing? So just giving students those avenues to decide, how do I feel like I'm going to be most successful today? And maybe I would choose a different option, just like the food, right? I would choose a different option next week, but today I really just want to write, or today I really just want to record a quick video because I don't feel like writing. And so, that we're going to get the best picture of the true level of understanding, I think, when we allow students to decide what avenue they want to use to share that learning and that understanding.
Yeah, or maybe you feel like normally you like to do video and today your hair's not on point, right? So
exactly.
I don't know where that's coming from there.
That's the reason people are listening to an audio right now.
Because my hair just would not lay the right way. Actually, I do have a sunburn on my nose right now. And I was like, if we had done a video interview, I totally would have been using some touch up on my nose there.
Way to own that. I appreciate that.
All right. But that would have, right. Exactly. But so I've told that kind of same thing to educators before, where why don't you have students get some choice in the way they do projects? And educators tend to say, I understand where they're coming from on this, and I'm sure you've heard it too. But I don't know how to do these video tools. I don't know how to do these audio tools. I don't know how to do these animation tools. And there's this feeling that the teacher needs to know how to do the tool before the teacher or before the student uses the tool, right? And you're like, no, you don't have to know how to do those things.
You don't have to master it first, because guess who's probably going to figure it out?
Right.
Your students.
Yeah. So you could spend a week trying to figure it out, and then you present it to them, and then you're like, well, couldn't you just do it this way? Or like, well, I figured out how to do this. And you're like, oh, they've already lapped me, right? They're already ahead of me on using this.
Oh, totally. My favorite thing to do for this kind of scenario we're talking about is not a station rotation where they actually rotate, but literally creating stations and basically saying, here's a tool at each station. So I did this with infographics when kids were going to design infographics. I was like, here's 4 different infographic stations. Just wander around, choose one that looks appealing. And with the group, what we're doing today is figuring out how it works and creating a student designed just basic manual, a how-to. And then often the tool that they decided they wanted to play with and learn about, they were tinkering with their friends, creating this simple Google Doc manual for, that was the one they were excited about. And some kids didn't end up loving their tool, and they'd use the other group's manual to figure out and use that tool. And it was just I don't have to know all of this. These kids are capable, and quite frankly, they're going to be encountering new technology throughout the course of their lives. So what better lesson than to allow them with a group of peers for support to investigate, explore, tinker, and figure out how it works, and then teach other kids.
Yeah. It's funny you bring up the infographic tools, because in that same section that I was referencing in the book before, there's the different visual tools that students might use to show their comprehension. And so I had to go through and select which tools to add in. So, I knew I was going to get Canva and Adobe Spark in there, right? But then I was like, all right, what about Venngage? And what about PictoChart? And what about, I don't even know what other ones. And so I'm going through and assessing what things they do. But so what I ended up deciding to do, not just there, but throughout the book, was to say, here's, 15 bullets of what you need to know about this tool. You're not going to be the master of the tool. You're just going to know what it does, right?
And basics.
You could then go learn it. Or as you're saying, the teacher can go, okay, these are the tools that we should pick from. I'm just going to let the students learn them, right? These are the tools, or maybe narrowing it down because they see what the tools are capable of. And then saying, okay, kids, here's the tool we're trying out today. And then the kids could take it from there, right?
Totally. There were moments reading your book where I was like, you would identify kind of the why you might use this type of tool. And then I felt like I was kind of speed dating the tools. Like, okay, let's find out a little about you. Oh, no, I don't think that's going to work. Let's find out a little bit about you. So you've done all the hard work for teachers of being like, here are some really great tools. Here's some features. Check them out. Decide which one you want to run with or which one you might want to go out with again.
I love the speed dating idea, except the downside is with speed dating, you have to wait those whole 3 minutes, right? With the tech tools, you can just turn the page whenever you're ready.
True. It's the ideal version of speed dating.
I am turning the page on you and moving on to the next person. But Canva, I would like to ask you out for a second date.
I agree. Canva and I are going steady.
Oh my gosh, Catlin, congratulations.
I know. I'm a big fan.
Well, you guys heard it here first. Catlin and Canva.
Mm-hmm. I hope we will be very happy together.
I think you will. I've seen some of the graphics online and your templates and everything. You guys make great stuff.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Well, Catlin, thank you so much for being on today. I hope people are going to go check out UDL and Blended Learning, Thriving in Flexible Learning Landscapes. As I said before, UDL is such a huge and important topic. And the way that you're mixing it with blended learning, I think, is just what educators need to hear about now. So I hope they're going to check that out. And I hope you'll also go follow Catlin on Twitter at Catlin_Tucker and check out all the rest of her work at catlintucker.com. Catlin, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Absolutely. And congratulations on your book.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, that was such a fun episode and so much great insight shared by Catlin. I hope I didn't embarrass her too much with her going steady with Canva talk there. As you guys know, I like to have some fun, and that was a fun chat and a fun turn we took there at the end. But she is just so awesome. I really enjoyed talking to her, and such great wisdom. And I can't wait to get my hands on her book that we talked about during the show, which was UDL and Blended Learning, Thriving in Flexible Learning Landscapes, which she co-wrote with Katie Novak. But the last thing I want to share with you before we duck out of this episode is a little message that I think is really going to help you as you look back at what we talked about during this episode. So Catlin and I talked about a lot of different educational technology tools, and we talked about decisions between a lot of them, and that can be very overwhelming. And I, mid-episode, listed for you a chapter of the book where I go over something like 17 different educational technology tools, and that can be overwhelming because there's so many choices, and that becomes overwhelming. This is actually what I talk about in chapter 4 of the book, which is titled Words, Restaurants, and Jams, where I talk about the work of Barry Schwartz, psychologist, who talks about the paradox of choice, as well as two psychologists that he cites within his work, Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper, who talk about this famous study about different jams. And if you've never heard about the jams, you're going to want to check out this chapter of the book because it is such a powerful not just metaphor, but scientific investigation that proves why having too many different options can be overwhelming. And so I know that when I'm sharing a bunch of different educational technology tools, I know that I run the risk of overwhelming you and keeping you from picking any at all because you're so overwhelmed. You're paralyzed by all of those different choices. So in chapter 4, Words, Restaurants, and Jams, I talk about the work of Schwartz and Iyengar and Lepper, as well as my 6 least favorite words and how they relate to restaurants. And I hope to help equip you with a mindset that will help you make those choices feel less overwhelming by limiting the number of things that could potentially overwhelm you. So hopefully that message will hit home and help you stay unoverwhelmed, stay not overwhelmed, stay calm, cool, and collected about these different educational technology tools. Just as calm, cool, and collected as Dr. Catlin Tucker was when I asked her if she was going steady with Canva. Oh, good stuff. All right. Well, that does it for our episode today. I am so grateful for you guys for being here today. I do hope to have another one of these kind of in between season 3 and season 4 episodes coming to you later this week. Hopefully within the week. We'll see. It'll depend on how quickly I can get it out there, but hopefully I do have one coming soon for you that I am really excited about. There's 3 more that I'm ready to get out there, and I'm really excited about all of them. And then somewhere in there, I'll also get back to the true normal format of the podcast with some guests and some games and some soapbox moments and some stuff from the Duct Tapers. That'll all be coming soon. Right now, thank you guys so much for listening. I know many of you are either preparing to or have just gone back into school for the new school year. And the fact that you're going through such a challenging process of moving back into class life, school life, and you're also listening to a podcast that is geared towards helping you do even better for your students, I think that's just amazing and awesome. So thank you so much for the work that you do, and I will see you here on the podcast
soon. Thank you for listening to the Educational Duct Tape podcast. Please consider rating and reviewing the show on your favorite podcast app. #EduDuctTape.
By the way, did you hear my neighbor's dog barking towards the end there? It's just a beautiful day right now and I have my windows open. I'm not in Siesta Key, Florida anymore. I'm in Ohio, but it's nice out and the windows are open and I'm enjoying the breeze coming in while I record, and the dog was barking, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to record it again. He's barking again.